Hello, listeners of the 21st Century Work-Life Podcast. Happy 2023. If we haven't met before, my name is Pilar Orti and I'm your host. If you happen to be listening after mid-January, then I hope you're enjoying the new year and then ignore the new year greeting. Just welcome to the show. I've been in my base in Spain for a few weeks, and while I was there, I decided not to do anything that involved being at a computer for a long while because I don't have a good setup, which means I'm a little bit behind with sending the files of the show to our podcast polisher, Ross, for the next episode. So I am a little bit behind schedule. However, I did want to greet you back into the new year with an episode, so I am repurposing here one of our episodes from Management Café. Did you know that we have that other show? It's a very different show to this one. Well, not very, but it's different. It's shorter episodes, and it's myself and Tim Burgess having a chat over coffee about an aspect of leadership and management in both co-located and remote teams. So regular listeners, you'll be familiar with Tim. He was the founder of Shield GEO, and he has spent a lot of time reflecting on his own leadership practice. So it's a lot of fun. We discuss stuff from our own experience, so sometimes it feels a bit like therapy, but mainly I hope it feels like a couple of friends chatting about work life, which we are. So you can find the podcast Management Café in any podcast app. Let me know if you can't find it, because then we need to do something about it. Or you can also go to managementcafepodcast.com, where we have also the show notes. I've been I'm starting to illustrate the show notes for that show just to see what that does to one, listener engagement, but also to my own practice as someone who is getting more and more into illustration. So anyway, this episode that I'm sharing with you today is about asynchronous communication, which is why I thought it was even more pertinent than the others. But I think if you are in any kind of leadership position or interested in managing people, then that show should be of interest to you. And talking of asynchronous communication, just a reminder that Simon Wilson and I are still trying out an audio-first course on asynchronous communication. This means it's been designed for you to listen to it, maybe how you listen to podcasts, maybe with a bit more intentionality of getting the content into, a notebook or your brain. So we're still testing it out, seeing how it lands. So if this is something that interests you, you can go to virtualnotdistant.com/your-opinion or go to the resources tab and you will see something that says your opinion. You can put your details there, or you can email me, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. Okay, well, I'm going to leave you now with episode 38 of Management Café. It lasts about 20 minutes. I hope you enjoyed. It's called Tackling the Asynchronous Environment.
Yeah, but also, in the worlds that you and I have lived in, you can't survive. You have to be in some sort of big organization where you can carry that sort of, in a small business or on your own or whatever. If you act like that, nothing ever happens. You starve.
That's the thing, isn't it? The thing with operating through meetings all the time, especially as you're saying in large organizations, that a lot of stuff can be said and you can get away with saying a lot of stuff but not doing much. I love that image. I have that image of what you were saying, of someone coming in and talking a lot in the meeting and then just not doing anything about it. But everyone remembers that person said a lot of stuff in the meeting, which is why I like the asynchronous world. Because it seems to me, especially for coordinating, that in the asynchronous work you can distribute, and when I'm talking of this, I'm not necessarily the manager distributing tasks, but the team gathering around tasks. Everyone distributes the tasks. You can see what everyone is doing. And in fact, you've got to put your name down, sometimes literally, or you have to click or create something that says task. And that little bit of friction, which doesn't exist in the meeting when you say, oh, I'll do it. That little bit of having to sit down on your own and commit to the task, this happens less, I think. I don't know, I'm thinking.
A big part of it also is that focus on output. That was something that like the remote community were hammering as a concept from very early on, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and so on, was you have to shift from that presenteeism, from looking at people to looking at the output of their work and being able to see it and track it if you need to. Again, like you're saying, if you're operating in that way asynchronously, you have to find other measures of how things are going and whether they're on track or not, which means you're looking at artifacts of work, and it's harder to hide in that environment. When I say harder to hide, it's harder to do nothing.
Yes.
And be considered to be doing a good job in that environment because you have no output.
Yeah. It has lots of challenges, though, I think, when you're looking after a team, and especially the way that you and I like to engage with the team members, with this personal connection with them, looking after the development, their growth, and sorry, Tim, I forgot that we might have some listeners here with us because we've just started the conversation around one of the favorite things I like to talk about. So, but listeners, so welcome to the Management Café. Tim and I are here having a chat about an aspect of leading others or being in charge. So you're very welcome to sit with us here for about 20 minutes. And we started, I don't know, we had a conversation earlier on about meetings. So now we've shifted the other way to the other environment of working with people and looking after people, which is that asynchronous space where we don't have that real-time contact with them, neither online nor in person. And how do you feel about that, Tim? You were just talking about, well, the focus shifts almost. There's a danger, I think, that the focus shifts so much from the person to the work that we forget about this other stuff that we love to talk about, the growing at work, I don't know. How do you navigate? Because you've been doing this for looking after a distributed business for a while, and you grew the team as well. So dying to hear your thoughts. I've got loads.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. And I think you've probably thought about it more than I have. But in my mind, there's work that you're just doing. You don't need anyone around for that necessarily. Like, you don't need anyone to be observing your work or supporting your work in real time, like sitting next to you most of the time. And in fact, there are benefits in not having that, because it can be a forcing function for you to be more independent and resilient. If you can't tap someone on the shoulder every time you get stuck, then you have to try and work those things out for yourself.
Sorry, because we talked about different ways of helping people grow, and that is a way I'd never thought of, is actually help them to not be around other people as much. But anyway, I don't want to. Sorry, I derailed you.
No, but you're right. Sometimes you want people to experience that little bit of friction, the struggle, and that at the fringes of their ability or their knowledge or comfort zone. That's where growth can happen. So it can be good in that way. And so the way I sort of think about it a little bit is there's two aspects. One is sort of orbits, so a lot of the time, you know what you're doing, and you can sort of go out on your little orbit and you can do all of your tasks, and then you're going to come back. And the times that you come back is not the time that you're doing your tasks. No, that's a time to replenish, to reassess, to spend time with colleagues. And so they're fairly clearly defined, the differences between them. Where I think we run into trouble is when there isn't that definition. When it's not clear, what do we want to spend our async time doing and what do we want to spend our sync time doing?
Do you mean as an individual or as a collective?
Both. Like the individual needs to be clear about it, the team needs to be clear about it, the manager needs to be clear about it, and the organization as well. Like, if the individual thinks that their time with the team is to ask them how to look stuff up in the knowledge base, which is something they could be working out themselves, but the rest of the team think that time is to be talking about the hardest things that they couldn't solve by themselves and where they needed someone else's help, then there's a friction there. The person's not fitting in with the same dynamic of the team.
So one thing that I think is a challenge when you're leading a team where there's a lot of asynchronous communication, so whether they're remote or just dispersed or different schedules or for whatever reason, it's the whole coaching aspect, I think, of management, by which I mean being there for people when they need you, but also making sure that you can help them to figure stuff out themselves. Because also the way that you're talking as well, it feels so much like that autonomy can also feel quite distant. And then the person might come back to either you or the team, but let's say come back to you with an issue, for example, when it needs to be solved. And then how do we strike then that coaching way of helping, which is more like, okay, don't let me tell you what to do. However, if we're communicating asynchronously with them, it's faster to give clear instructions back, for example. Do you know what I mean? That's what I find the trickiest. And it might be that we have to come back to a real-time conversation to do that. I don't know.
Well, I mean, first of all, we don't need to get it right every time. We just need to get it right most of the time. And I remember when I was reading books about being a parent, and there was some book about, how to treat your kids with in the right way, that they'd studied parent and child interaction, and they said the very best parents, there was this particular thing they wanted people to do when their kids were upset. And they said the very best parents get this right about, I think it was like 40% of the time, 20% of the time, 40% of the time. Like, in my mind, I was expecting them to say 100%.
Yeah.
But they're like, mostly they get it wrong, but they get it wrong enough of the time. And so that's the first step, I think, is that with this stuff, we should give ourselves a little bit of grace that we're not going to get it right that often. We just want to be heading in the right direction most of the time. So there are going to be times when somebody wants support and they want support right now, and you can't give it to them. Now, that happens in a synchronous environment as well as an asynchronous environment.
Yeah.
It's not great, but it's just part of the cost that you pay for operating in that way. And I think when we try and make it too formulaic, and try and do too much pattern matching about these are the conversations I only have in this direction, and these are, I always treat these things in this other way. That's where I think we can get a little bit unstuck. To a degree, we are going to pattern match, but also where I think we operate best is when we actually try and take a little bit of time to think, what might be happening in this situation, and what do I want to do? What would I normally do? Is that the right thing to do? Because has the person just started work? Maybe I do want to support them a little more actively. Are they going through something in their personal life where they mightn't have as much bandwidth, or in their work life? Are they under a lot of stress? Maybe I do want to support them more directly, just to remove any burden from them, just to make it a little bit lighter. Or, it might be that, in fact, my well is a little bit dry, and so I'm going to try and push it to a synchronous conversation because I want a little bit of that interaction.
Yeah.
It's also contextual.
I think then that the fact that actually it's asynchronous could mean that we can take a bit more time as well. I think if we have a setup where the communication is not always in real time, it actually gives us space, like you said, there will be situations when it's not an issue. And like you say, a lot of these things, normally we're going to be operating okay. But I think that for times when we are thinking, well, how do I want to take this? And it could give us a bit more time. And I think I forget about that the asynchronicity can also gives us as team leaders some space to think through.
Oh,
or like you say, and also I do overthink stuff sometimes, but I think by thinking about it in advance, it means that it can then become something that's more instinctive.
So everybody can overthink stuff, but you're absolutely right. First of all, that space, if you're a leader in a heavily synchronous organization, good luck getting any thinking time. You're in meeting after meeting after meeting after message after message after message. It's a nightmare. You're just literally just bouncing around all day. And the only time you might get to think is when you're actually sitting in a meeting where you think you're not actually having to pay attention. And that's not a good dynamic. But in asynchronous work, actually, you'll carve out whole periods where you can focus on the things that are most important to you and your role, which is a real gift. But that overthinking, that's something that I have noticed, particularly in async, is, I do it myself for sure. And I noticed it with some people more than others. But there were people where I thought, I can't let them stew on this because I'm not talking to them until Tuesday. And today, today's Wednesday.
Yeah.
So that's going to be 5 days.
Yeah.
And if they don't get it clearly now, they could have gone all the way down a road in the wrong direction by next week. But even within async, there are still all sorts of techniques that you can use to try and correct for that. That whole thing around over communication and painting done and trying to give all the additional context, and maybe moving from short form messages to long form messages, or recording video or audio. There are lots of ways that you can try and compensate for that.
That's another level of awareness that you need to have in that space as well, is to not get stuck in one form of communication. That's a very, very good point. I mean, my worry is, as someone who's very comfortable with asynchronous communication, and in particular writing, is that you can get also comfortable as a team leader around that. And where is the line? So I'll give an example. I was listening to Liam Martin on the Management Teams podcast, and he said he hadn't talked to his assistant in 4 months because all the work they do is async. And I thought, I think maybe I could do that again. I started to reflect, oh my God, I had someone who was like a operational support for a couple of months, and I did go maybe for 2 months not having a meeting with her. She was very part-time, so there was not a lot of overlap, and she was in the US, but still, it's very easy, I think, basically, for time to go by, especially in a global team, and suddenly you haven't had, for example, a one-to-one with someone.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I remember talking to Amir from Doist at one of the Running Remote. There was a dinner at one of those Running Remote conferences. And at one point, they had no meetings in Doist, no meetings at all. And then they felt like that was too much, and they started to bring meetings back. He still, from time to time, I'll see he tweets his calendar. He's got virtually 0 meetings. It's pretty easy to slip into a habit and sort of take it to extremes. But there are times in our life where it's okay. We don't necessarily need to be seen at work, and we just want to do our work and go away. But there's something a little bit, I think, dehumanizing about not having any personal connection with the people that you're working with or interacting with. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's a price that you're willing to pay, but you should be doing it consciously, knowing that if you're not going to have any personal interaction with people, it doesn't necessarily have to be real time, although, I think it helps. But if you're not having that personal interaction, then I feel like there's going to be something missing. There's going to be a level of engagement that's missing there.
Having a meeting to talk about work, that's personal enough for me. But do you mean other stuff? Or
I don't think I've ever had a meeting where we didn't get into something that wasn't work related. It just always blends for me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And also there's the fact that for me, because I'm not, I mean, I'll talk about anything. And if the conversation goes into a personal thing let's not say, I don't like to say personal, maybe a non-work related, because I think that the reason why I'm very conscious if I become very asynchronous is that for me, a personal thing is where you bring the whole person in. And the whole person in is at least the voice. It's the humor that comes up maybe more during a synchronous interaction than just an asynchronous. It's the thought processes as well. I mean, you can get a lot from asynchronous communication about how someone thinks, but when you're with them in real time, I think you get an even greater insight around that. And something I've realized that even in spite of myself sometimes, is that I'm very async. And for example, we in one of the other podcasts that I do, there's a team of 3. There were actually 2 of us mainly working together. And I think for a year, we communicated asynchronously in Trello, which is like, so not even long form, like task based, everything. And then when we actually met, because we wanted to discuss stuff and we wanted to actually plan for the longer term, which I think is wonderful to do. I really enjoyed it when I saw her. She's not even my friend. And we didn't do any personal talk, but it was really personal to see her and to be with her and spend some time, and also just spend some time in listening to her and spend some time in talking to her. So, but I forget.
I think it's common. It's common, but as human beings, we're wired for connection. It's painful for us to be too by ourselves. You think about in prison, solitary confinement's like the worst thing they can do to you. There are rules around how long they can put someone in solitary confinement or the conditions they can do it in, because it's so damaging to the person. So I think even in an asynchronous, well, and certainly something we tried to do at Shield was try to provide lots of points for connection, for those to be sort of welcoming, like actively, like not pushing people to do it, but like just nudging them, to remind people that we want to connect. You don't have to connect, but we want to connect. There are people here who want to connect, because there are people here who care about you and they care about the work that you do, but they also care about you as a person who is at work with us doing this stuff. And I mean, for me, that's a really important atmosphere.
And I think that that's important to notice where you sit in it, because, for example, for me, I don't need that much real time. For me, a lot of that sense of connection that you're talking about and not feeling alone comes from the asynchronous space as well. Like, I don't know, I saw something this morning, it made me really happy, and it was some message somewhere. And to be able to see that that is me, and that's not for everyone in the team, that's really important. And it might not be as important for me to have a real-time conversation with a team member, but it might be important for them because of the way that we experience connection so differently in both mediums. Now that we've layered the way in which we work together with this extra space, I think the awareness needs to just turn up so many notches in this other way as well.
Oh, yeah. Like you say, there's so much bias in terms of our own personal preference and how we feel is the appropriate way, or how we want to be treated, what we think is the best way for us to be at the right level of connection. Along that spectrum, we only want to be at this point. We don't want to be any more connected. We don't want to be any less connected. We're liking this point right now for how we're feeling at this particular juncture, and then we'll slide all the way around. But the danger is when we then think that should apply to anyone but ourselves.
Yeah.
I think that's a hard lesson sometimes as managers as well, is that, and we're getting a little bit away from async here, but people can be happy or content in a way that doesn't look like happiness or contentment to you. They can be happy in a way that you wouldn't be happy. And sometimes they can be happy and you look at it and you're like, I don't see how they're happy. But if they tell you they are, maybe they are.
I think that's a great point to stop this non-async conversation. This is the thing also, that, again, you can go backwards and forwards with asynchronous, but you can cover so much in so many different layers in like 20 minutes of a coffee and get to really have a good conversation and really get to know someone through how they're approaching work. So it's, I suppose that, that balance, it's so, and that constant awareness. So listeners, we'd love you to drop by the Management Café podcast website and tell us what you think. We have a contact form there at managementcafepodcast.com, or you can email us at managementcafepodcast@gmail.com. Well, Tim, any other synchronous thoughts that we have before we walk out the door?
No, like you say, it's interesting how it's like an espresso. Espresso? Is that's the
espresso?
I'm so bad
Yeah.
with coffee.
He's a tea drinker.
Yeah, that sharp burst of intensity can be enough, right? You don't need to drag your caffeine out all day. You can just have an espresso.
Wonderful analogy. Well, with that, coffee's over for us. Now it's over to you.
That's risky when I'm trying to give the coffee analogy.
Thank you for joining us at the Management Café. Remember, you can subscribe to the show on whatever podcast app you use to make sure you get your weekly dose of reflection. Our website is management.cafe, and on Twitter we are at Management Caf. That's all for this episode from myself, Pilar Orti, and our fellow co-host, Tim Burgess. Thank you for listening.